Just a few decades ago, Taiwan was known as Garbage Island, drowning in trash from its rapid industrialization and booming economy. Now, fast forward to today, and it's flipped the script with a world-leading 60% recycling rate. And it's not only cleaning up its streets, but also fueling an industry of turning waste into wealth. But with nearly 12 million tons of garbage piling up in 2024, an all-time high, Taiwan's waste incineration at record highs, can Taiwan keep its green streak going? I'm Divya Gopalan, and you're watching Connected on TaiwanPlus. To discuss Taiwan's trash dilemma, I'm joined from the UK by Clare Richardson-Barlow, a lecturer at the School of Politics and International Studies at the University of Leeds. Great to have you on the program. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure.
I just want to start with why or how Taiwan earned the nickname of Garbage Island.
There are actually a number of factors at play. Importantly, Taiwan in the 70s and 80s, similar to other places around the world, had a real increase in waste. And didn't have a lot to do with it, being that it is an island nation and sort of secluded from some of the options that might be available to other countries. And to deal with this waste, perhaps most famously, Taiwan launched what's called a 4-in-1 recycling program in 1997, which integrated a variety of solutions to address the growing waste problem. And that's where Taiwan went from this garbage island, having too much waste, to figuring out solutions for how to integrate that waste into the local economy, get community involved, infrastructure, public education, etc.
And now Taiwan has seemingly a very successful pay-as-you-throw system. How does this model work, or how does that work, and could it work for other countries?
Yeah, the system creates a direct financial incentive to reduce waste. So essentially, the less you throw away, the less you pay. That means in places like Taipei, residents must use government-issued bags for non-recyclable waste, and recycling is free and widely accessible, which encourages sorting. While adoption in other countries with weaker enforcement might be difficult, pairing this system with education campaigns and phased implementation, which is what Taiwan has done, might yield similar behavioral shifts over time. But this really requires policy support and policy drive, as well as a sustained implementation of these different factors to make sure that any program really sticks.
And speaking of programs, Taiwan has quite a successful waste management program. So to put it in perspective, let's take a look at the global waste management market. And these figures are from a UK-based global market research firm, and it shows that the market size is estimated to grow by $224 billion from 2024 to 2028, while the waste management industry is estimated to grow nearly 9% during that forecast period. Now, in 2024, that market grew around 7.5%, with an estimated contribution from the Asia-Pacific region of around 33%. We talk about waste management, but in reality, how effective is the recycling programs most of the world has, or even Taiwan has, really? I mean, how much of it is the waste we put out in those different bins actually recycled?
It really depends on the country that we're looking at. In the case of Taiwan, it's made major strides. It has roughly 24 large-scale incinerators, which generate electricity to power hundreds of thousands of homes. And then a portion of this energy is sold back to the national grid. And this approach has helped Taiwan reduce landfill use to around less than 2% of its total waste, which is a really big achievement for an island with limited space. That being said, Taiwan's incinerators are less efficient than, say, Europe's top systems. For example, Sweden and Germany use advanced technologies that allow waste facilities to produce both electricity and heating for homes. If you compare that to many developing countries, we see that landfills tend to be the norm. And Taiwan's model is much cleaner and more efficient than that. Open landfills have a variety of challenges for societies, ranging from health issues to environmental impacts. So really, in short, Taiwan sort of sits between Europe's highly efficient waste systems and emerging market systems that are still dependent on landfills. And that's sort of what has made its rise and its role in both domestically and internationally really important, that it sits in this spot between two extremes. And this really shows that Taiwan is integrating in a way that has created a circular economy strategy nationally, not replacing waste, but managing how we work with the waste that we have.
Right, and going back to Taiwan's incinerators, Taiwan has the highest density of municipal waste incinerators in the world. I just want to try and understand how that works with regards to returning energy back onto the grid or being used into the circular economy. And really, is this the best way for a place like Taiwan to be managing its waste?
Well, the incinerators are less efficient than those that are used elsewhere. So to kind of demonstrate that, systems in Sweden and Germany can reach efficiency rates upwards of 80%, whereas Taiwan's average is roughly 16%. Now, whether or not the use of incinerators is really the way to go, I think Taiwan is demonstrating that an all of the above approach is really important. So using incinerators, but also managing recycling and waste domestically through community programs and education, as well as government and private sector support. So it's less a focus on just the incinerators, but the whole system and how those factors work together.
Now, aside from industrial waste, plastic waste is starting to be a big problem in Taiwan. And I'm just going to go through some figures first. Globally, the plastic waste is a growing crisis. So if we're going to look at the waste management market, here's a list of the leading importers and exporters of plastic waste for 129 countries in 2022. Japan and wealthy European countries remained among the major net exporters of plastic waste, with the Philippines one of the biggest exporters also. Turkey is taking in more plastic waste from the EU along with the Czech Republic. And the other biggest recipients now include Malaysia, Vietnam, Indonesia. This is after China banned the import of plastic waste in 2018. Claire, if we were going to go specifically into the issue of plastic waste, let's take a look at why plastic usage is growing or that amount of waste is growing. And how much does it have to do with the pandemic and all the single-use plastic?
I would say single-use plastic is definitely a very big part of this. Growing economies and emerging markets and populations that are able to produce easy, accessible products that make our day-to-day lives easier contributes in part to that plastic waste. But a large portion of plastic waste is single-use plastic that's commonly used for making bottles and containers, so holding liquids, often those that we drink. And Taiwan has definitely seen a huge increase, similar to other countries, in the amount of single-use plastic waste, but the way that it has responded to managing this plastic waste is pretty remarkable compared to other places. So, for example, Taiwan recycles roughly 50% of its PET plastic bottles, the kind that you and I might use for a water bottle throughout the day, whereas places like the United States have recycling of those bottles that's not quite reaching even 30%.
Well, why isn't more and more being done, or how much is currently being done, would you say, in changing the psyche of the people? Because I find, especially in East Asia, there is a tendency to use a lot of plastic for wrapping of food, triple bagging things. Why isn't more being done in that sense to address that rather than address the end product? And also, I guess to that question is, I think if you look at people's psyche, people immediately think, oh, we can recycle this and we can recycle that, so I'm going to use it anyway. Is there a flaw in that thinking?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think it's important to recognize that all of that plastic waste does serve a purpose in day-to-day lives and the improvement in our quality of life. And so I hate to make any recommendation about what should be done with plastic waste as though I'm not also benefiting from it. That being said, One thing that Taiwan has done around this sort of psyche of how we use materials is integrating education programs at a very young age and making recycling a real important part of society. So there are incentives for various parts of society to engage in plastic waste recycling. That's not something that I necessarily grew up with in the United States, for example, where I'm from originally, or that I see in schools and education systems here in the UK at the same level. So looking at Taiwan's model, where they're using both policy incentives, business partnerships that encourage businesses to also play a part in what happens to that plastic waste, and then also regular everyday citizens playing a role, that combination is really important. And we don't see that implemented in quite the same way in the West, in the United States or the UK examples that I've given. So you really need to see some multi-part change happening, and that includes at industry, government or policy, and then local levels.
Yeah, and speaking of which, and we mentioned this in the intro, Taiwan's waste or garbage production has reached an all-time high in 2024. In your studies, what is that symptomatic of? Is it as a country becomes richer? Is that what normally happens? Or is there kind of a system that needs to be addressed?
It's really difficult to say. I mean, there's definitely some generalizations that we can make about economic development and growing waste problems. We see that throughout the global South, but also across the West, that as we get richer and we're able to purchase more and really use our money, we see an increase in trash and single-use products. And this is in part a result of a neoliberal capitalist system. So McDonald's and international trade, products that we might not have been able to reach in previous years, but now as a result of a really interconnected global economic system, we have access to them. So there is an element of that there. There's also an element of kind of getting the system right. How, as we increase the amount of waste and trash that we have, what do we do with it? And how do we balance both recycling with also a use of that waste material? And that's something that Taiwan has really focused on quite a bit, not just recycling trash at the end point, but looking at how trash can be used in various innovative forms in industry and throughout the economy, as well as ways in which we can address single use and what we do with those products at an individual level. So getting children involved, different levels of society that might engage in recycling programs for cash, for example, and then the ways in which businesses play a role in that process as well. So I think we're seeing an element of Taiwan having a lot of success with how it responds to its trash problem in the 90s and the 2000s. And then also, as that waste continues to grow, how the country sort of responds in kind. And that's what we're seeing develop now.
Right. And what is, as we saw there in the chart earlier of the main waste exporting countries and importing countries, where does Taiwan stand in this?
In terms of export, Taiwan doesn't export any trash as far as I'm aware. And it is really standing apart from countries that have quite high export rates. So for example, the United States or even parts of Europe and the UK. And so Taiwan has really kind of stood out as a country that isn't exporting its waste to other places. Instead, it's finding a domestic use for that waste. And that serves multiple uses. It serves economic uses domestically. It's part of any energy transition, figuring out what we do with our products and our waste and how we manage it. And then it also really sets an example for the rest of the Asia Pacific and East Asia, how we manage our trash and what we accept from other countries, as well as sort of shining a spotlight on countries that are exporting a lot of trash and what happens to it, where it goes, and the way in which it affects local economies that might be accepting those imports.
Now, we talk about Taiwan's waste management, the high recycle rates. Are you seeing any innovations here or systems here that you feel can be replicated in places like the US, where it's only a 30% recycling rate, or where you are in the UK?
Yeah, I think one important thing that can be replicated is the business role, industry role in recycling. So making sure that there are, in Taiwan's case, for example, licensing recyclers, subsidizing operations via recycling funds, really getting labor involved, and then also having rules and regulations for businesses that are producing or engaging with single-use plastics, for example. Those are systems that could be implemented in a variety of different countries, in part sort of lending credence to the role that an everyday person might play in collecting and recycling products is also really important. That really shows an engagement with the way in which informal recyclers can be recognized as key contributors to the economy. And then there's also the role that governments can play in supporting and creating these inclusive systems, either offering training or legal pathways and safety measures, or even pricing systems that reward good sorting and ensure recyclables reach reliable buyers, for example. All of those are things that we in the West and elsewhere in the Asia Pacific and the Global South as well have the ability to implement, but it really requires three main things. First and foremost is policy support. The government needs to be supporting putting these measures in place. Then you need a sort of societal acceptance and engagement over the long term. And then also, perhaps most importantly, is getting the private sector to buy into that and to engage in that system. So all of those things are doable. It's just a matter of making sure that they're made a sustained priority.
I'm also interested in another point you made earlier about Taiwan's incinerators not having the efficiency of ones, some of those in Europe. Can you give us an example of a place that's doing it right when it comes to incinerating the waste and then getting that into the circular economy?
Yeah, Sweden and Germany are really held up as some of the best examples for incineration. They use advanced technologies called combined heat and power, or CHP, which allows waste facilities to produce both electricity and also heating for homes. And these systems are highly efficient. They range between, depending on the size, 30 to 80% efficiency. And they really set an example for what CHP upgrades and district heating can look like in a community. Taiwan is investing in these sorts of technologies, but they're just not at the same level and sustained use that you would find in, say, Sweden and Germany themselves.
So basically, it's down really to the technology and the machinery that's being used right now, rather than the method that Taiwan is feeding into the waste it's feeding into its incinerators at the moment.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, there's definitely a component of both, but predominantly it's the advanced technology that's being used.
So when you see Taiwan's businesses, there are lots of smaller businesses, for instance, turning food waste into compost or biogas, and then also turning plastic components into building material for construction. What is it, do you feel, that incentivizes like these companies to do that, or to take that step that Taiwan is doing where we're not really seeing in other parts of the world?
Well, in some ways, Taiwan sort of offers a middle path. While not fully formalized, it has a network of collectors that play a really crucial role in recycling rates. And there is a system in place to support the collectors. And then on the business side, there is government support and also policy that aligns with incentivizing businesses to align their own goals with environmental goals. Major textile firms like Far Eastern, for example, have helped set up the Taiwan Recycling Corporation to ensure that there's a really steady supply of recycled single-use plastic, which they use to make clothing, carpets, and packaging for global brands. Government policies like tiered recycling fees and bans on certain single-use plastics push industry towards more circular, less wasteful practices. So again, that combination of policy support and measures that encourage domestic and industry engagement is really important. That definitely can happen in other countries, but if those different measures aren't aligned, then I think that's where we see a gap. The US would be a good example. We have quite a change in our environmental policies from one administration to another. So there's not a real sustained system and kind of approach to how we manage certain environmental issues, for example. Whereas in Taiwan, this has been really ingrained into society and into the business and policy climate. So it's expected that you are engaging in these processes.
And finally, Clare, if there's one thing you have your eye on when it comes to recycling or waste management, be it a type of technology that's currently being used, what would it be? What do you feel like is the next phase in waste management for Taiwan, or perhaps that's being done in another part of the world?
Well, there's some of that, high-tech investment for incinerators, for example. But I think there's also a really important role for digitization, looking at the way in which digital sectors and AI can play a role in how we manage waste, and really taking the management of waste in Taiwan from where it is now, which is a really great place compared to many other examples throughout the world, but continuing to push forward and further integrate what we would refer to as circularity or circular practices into policy, industry, and general society, making sure that we're using technologies that are improving data transparency or reducing contamination, and making extended producer responsibility schemes are really low-hanging fruit, things that we can see Taiwan continue to develop that provide really important examples for other countries as well. And that's sort of what I would say makes Taiwan especially inspirational in its ability to embed circular economy across a variety of different sectors, be they public, private, or civic sectors. And those lessons are really scalable. And the way in which Taiwan has continued to approach improving its system, as opposed to just sitting with one method and one approach to, quote, recycling or waste management.
That's really encouraging, Clare. Thank you so much. We've run out of time. Clare Richardson-Barlow, lecturer at the University of Leeds. Thank you so much.